I still remember the morning it all came undone. The sky looked normal, birds were singing like any other Sunday, but the ground was wet where it never should have been. I stepped out with a cup of coffee in hand, boots damp from the dew, and followed the sound of running water that didn't belong. When I reached the western edge of my property, my stomach just dropped. The river, the one that had quietly curved behind my land for generations, was now roaring straight through the middle of my lower pasture. It wasn't a flood or a freak storm. Someone had moved it. There were fresh bulldozer tracks on the bank, new stone riprap, and a metal sign gleaming under the sun like a tombstone. Approved by Willow Creek Estates, HOA River Diversion and Water Management Project. Phase 1. I stood there with mud creeping up my boots, staring at that sign, realizing that my land, my grandfather's land, had just been turned into somebody else's project. At first I thought it was a mistake. Maybe the city, maybe some flood control program. But when I called the HOA, I got voicemail. When I went to their clubhouse, a clerk half my age wouldn't even look at me. "You'll have to put it in writing, sir." I did, 3 times. 2 days later, a letter slid under my door. "Dear Mr. Tanner, your inquiries fall outside your HOA privileges. The board's environmental consultants have approved the redirection under subsection 9B of the master plan. Unauthorized entry into the construction zone will be considered trespassing." That's how I learned that my own field was now their construction zone. They'd built a river through my land and were threatening to arrest me for stepping in it. My property sits just outside the HOA boundary, always has. My grandfather bought it after World War II, planted every tree with his own hands, and dug an irrigation ditch that fed our crops from the natural bend of that same river. It wasn't just water to us, it was heritage. But when the Willow Creek Estates subdivision popped up 30 years ago, they wrapped their little fiefdom around us like a noose. For decades they tried to buy us out, then fine us, then bully us. And when none of that worked, they did this. They couldn't take the land, so they took the water. Within a week, the field started to rot. Onions turned soft kale, wilted, the soil stank of mildew. Every morning I'd walk the rows and feel something inside me buckle. I hadn't cried in years, not since my wife died, but standing in that flooded pasture, watching generations of work drown, I felt something break. I sent photos, emails, letters. Nothing. I tried to block the flow with sandbags, and they fined me again $1,200 for obstruction of drainage. I filed a grievance with the county, and they said if the HOA had permits, there was nothing they could do. So there I was, watching my life dissolve, while the board congratulated themselves for improving local water management. I started to think maybe it was pointless. Maybe I should just sell what was left, walk away. I'd sit at the kitchen table at night, surrounded by paperwork and mud-stained boots, asking myself if I was just some stubborn fool fighting progress. That's when Felix called. Felix is an old Army buddy, now a water engineer at City Hall. I sent him photos. He drove out the next morning, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the banks like he was reading a crime scene. After 20 minutes, he muttered, "They didn't get this cleared through us. Not properly." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means someone skipped a few steps, maybe forged a few stamps." That was the first crack in their wall. Felix handed me old watershed maps and a contact in the Environmental Review Office. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Still, it didn't stop the water. My land was dying. My voice was gone, and every letter they sent felt like another nail in the coffin. A week later, a man in a blazer knocked on my door. "Blake Thorne, legal liaison for the HOA," he said, smiling like a car salesman. "I understand there's been some frustration." He spoke softly, polished, every word practiced. I asked him why the hell they thought they could move a river across my property. He said, "Technically, the segment rerouted lies within a shared utility corridor under the 1989 Platt Amendment." "I never signed any 1989 amendment," I told him. "No," he said, "your grandfather did." That was a lie. I'd reviewed that title myself when I inherited the farm in 2002, clean as bone. I told him to leave. He closed his folder, gave me that perfect PR smile, and said, "You're not going to win this." That night, I drank whiskey straight from the bottle and stared at the letterhead of their attorney firm, wondering how a bunch of neighbors with clipboards had become a cartel with lawyers. The next day I posted one photo on the local Facebook group. The HOA diverted the river. My crops are gone. Did anyone else know? At first silence. Then slowly the comments came. Some said they'd seen trucks but thought it was city work. One woman said the HOA promised her fewer mosquitoes. Another said she got a survey months ago but didn't realize it meant construction. Then came a private message from a former board member. Look at the consultant report from last October. Kravitz Environmental. It's fake. They'd hired a ghost firm. No office, no phone number, just a website full of stock photos. That's when I stopped feeling powerless. I started printing everything, meeting minutes, maps, fake permits. When I filed my complaint with the city, the HOA came after me hard, a cease and desist for defamation, threats of a lawsuit, 12 pages of legal intimidation. But by then, I'd already contacted a lawyer, Lana Ridge, sharp as a blade. She filed a pre-litigation complaint for fraud, illegal land alteration, and violations of state water codes. She also pushed for an injunction to freeze all work. 2 nights later, someone slashed my truck tires. The next morning, my mailbox was in the ditch. I filed a police report. No arrests. I showed Lana. She said, "Good. That's intimidation. It helps our case." A week later, the city finally confirmed the permit was fake. The HOA's entire project was built on a forgery. The audit started, the media caught wind, and the board scrambled to blame clerical errors. But while they were spinning lies, I saw the weather forecast, an atmospheric river, heavy rain, the kind that doesn't knock politely. The same old river they'd forced through my field now flowed barely 300 yards from their pristine neighborhood. They had no idea what was coming. I tried to warn them. I sent letters, emails, even walked into the HOA office myself. If that river floods, I said, it's not my land that'll go first. It's yours. The manager never looked up. We're following city guidelines, sir. So I warned the residents directly, mass emails, old maps attached. Within hours, I was banned from every local forum labeled a fearmonger, but not everyone ignored me. A woman showed up at my door the next night, nervous eyes holding a file. "I'm Megan Halpern," she said. "I was a structural engineer for the HOA 3 years ago. They ignored my report. Her document spelled it out clear as daylight. High risk of subsoil collapse during heavy moisture events. Do not build west of line F3. They'd built anyway, and now the storm was 36 hours away. That night I couldn't sleep. The rain started just past midnight, thick, angry sheets pounding the roof like artillery. By dawn, the river was a monster. It had already chewed through the HOA's shiny stone embankments. I filmed everything, sent the footage to Lana. By noon, the neighborhood was underwater. Basements flooded, yards turned to lakes. The retaining wall behind the HOA president's house cracked in half, sending his backyard sliding into the street. By evening, the local news ran my footage under the headline, "Whistleblower Warned HOA of Flood Risk Months Before Disaster." The next morning, a courier handed me a lawsuit, $150,000 in damages for spreading false information. I laughed. They were suing me for being right too early. But the water didn't care about lawsuits. It kept rising. The embankments gave out one by one. Then I saw it through the rain across the valley. Blandon's $1 million home, the pride of Willow Creek Estates. The ground beneath it folded like wet paper. The back deck snapped, glass shattered, and the whole structure slid into the flood, swallowed by the same river he'd tried to control. I filmed it. Not out of spite, but because the truth needed witnesses. That footage went everywhere, local then national. The district attorney launched a criminal investigation. Within days, forged permits, environmental fraud, reckless endangerment. The HOA board was suspended, their bank accounts frozen. When they arrested Blandon, still in his country club windbreaker, I didn't cheer. I just stood in my ruined field and watched the water recede. It was quiet again. The river was finding its old path, curving gently along the edge of my land, exactly where my grandfather said it belonged. And that's where I left it, because some things, like rivers, like truth, can only be bent so far before they come back for you.